Talking about here on my channel right now. It's all about Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively's.
From the very moment this whole controversy first erupted online, there was this strange tension building around Blake Lively because people were watching her every move as she tried to present herself as the victim while simultaneously driving a narrative that wasn't aligning with the evidentiary reality. She kept trying to act as if every piece of content made about her or the wider situation was some pre-orchestrated smear campaign, especially the content created by the YouTube creator who runs the channel Flawsome Talk, who consistently analyzes public court records and statements from both sides. From the beginning, Blake seemed absolutely convinced that videos analyzing her behavior or questioning the legitimacy of her allegations were not just simple commentary or opinion pieces, but part of some hidden agenda controlled by Justin Baldoni himself. And she repeated this narrative so often, first subtly then very aggressively, that it became almost like a mantra she wanted the whole world to believe without ever providing documentation or evidence that the YouTuber was being directed, paid, or even contacted by Baldoni in any way. But when each claim she threw into the air finally reached the courtroom, it fell apart under scrutiny, because judges don't operate on vibes, narratives, or celebrity status. They operate on proof, and Blake had none. The more this escalated, the more people began to notice that everything Blake accused others of doing seemed to be a reflection of her own behavior. She positioned herself as the target of a smear campaign when she was actually the one sending subtle digs, shaping selective narratives in the media, and indirectly encouraging her massive fanbase to push a story that painted Justin Baldoni as some manipulative puppet master controlling influencers, lawyers, commentary channels, and journalists. And yet, when the judge asked for the receipts to support these allegations, emails, screenshots, messages, any traceable communication, there was absolutely nothing concrete. Blake had to eventually concede that she had no evidence whatsoever that Flawsome Talk was working with Justin Baldoni in any capacity. But instead of taking accountability or acknowledging the way her framing had misled people, she pivoted by claiming she felt there was a coordinated effort based on the timing of the videos or the tone of the commentary. But the legal system doesn't run on feelings, and the judge made that very clear. What's ironic is that the YouTube creator at the center of her accusations had never even interacted with Baldoni personally. All of the videos were based on public documents, depositions, and open source information that anyone could access with enough patience and attention to detail. Nothing in those videos suggested private communication, and nothing hinted at collaboration. They were simply commentary. And yet, Blake launched an entire narrative, first through PR whispers, then through legal filings, accusing the creator of spreading misinformation at the direction of Baldoni. When that accusation was legally challenged, she couldn't produce even a single piece of evidence. Not one email, not one text message, not even a comment showing coordination. The court proceedings became almost embarrassing for her because the more her attorneys pushed her claims, the more obvious it became that she was relying on public perception rather than factual data. She wanted the court to accept her narrative based solely on her intuition and celebrity image. But the judge didn't allow that. When pressed, Blake admitted that she could not affirmatively prove any collusion between Flawsome Talk and Baldoni. She even admitted that her assumptions came from general online activity, which essentially means she relied on internet speculation, not authenticated evidence. And the moment she said that, the entire courtroom energy shifted because her strongest allegation, one she'd been using to justify her hostility toward critics, collapsed in seconds. This was a major turning point because once you strip away that narrative, the rest of her case begins looking weaker and weaker. Her central pillar was that she faced coordinated harassment and defamation from groups tied to Baldoni. But if she couldn't prove the YouTuber was connected to him, then what else was she unable to prove? That's when lawyers, journalists, and observers realized the pattern. Most of her accusations had the same issue. Boldly stated, publicly repeated, and emotionally charged, yet unsupported by evidence. In fact, the YouTuber's response only strengthened the truth. He explained, clearly and calmly, that he was simply reviewing the case based on publicly filed documents that anyone could download from the court system. His commentary wasn't personal, nor was it emotional. It was analysis. And because he didn't attack her personally and didn't use slurs or defamatory language, Blake had no legal standing to accuse him of wrongdoing. The real issue was that she disliked the narrative he presented, because his analysis didn't paint her as the innocent victim she wanted to portray herself as. With no proof to back her claims, Blake's entire legal posture faltered. She kept trying to shift the narrative by insisting that Justin Baldoni had a far-reaching influence online, suggesting he planted stories, manipulated the media, and used creators to attack her. But this narrative wasn't supported by timelines, cross-examinations, or data. Instead, what the evidence actually showed was that most of the negative attention around her grew organically as people read the court filings and noticed inconsistencies. Her public statements, legal claims, and PR narratives weren't aligning. When inconsistencies exist, the public will naturally question them. There's no conspiracy needed. Another key moment came when her own lawyers subtly distanced themselves from her harsher claims because they clearly didn't want to perjure themselves or present arguments the court would dismiss outright. Even they seemed aware that some of Blake's more dramatic accusations were not based on verifiable fact but on her perception of the situation. That is why in her summary judgment filings, Blake had to concede that she lacked evidence, a phrase no celebrity wants attached to their legal case, especially when they're the one pushing the allegations. Watching all of this unfold, it became clear that Blake underestimated how the legal system treats unsubstantiated claims. The court isn't like social media. You can't convince a judge through dramatic storytelling or emotional performances. And when it came time to present evidence, she simply didn't have the documentation to support what she claimed was happening behind the scenes. Her PR team also played a heavy role in shaping the online discourse, but even their spin couldn't fix the gaping factual holes that began emerging. They tried to inflate minor incidents into major allegations, tried to redirect public sympathy toward her, and attempted to paint Baldoni as a powerful manipulator with shadow connections everywhere. But none of that held up once witnesses and experts reviewed the actual filings. Meanwhile, the commentary channel continued to operate normally, releasing videos based on updates in the case. Even when Blake's fans harassed the creator, he remained composed, reminding viewers that the commentary was rooted in evidence, not personal bias. And that composure is probably what irritated Blake the most. She couldn't break him, couldn't intimidate him, and couldn't legally silence him. As pressure built, she had to finally confront the fact that her accusations were not only unsupported but potentially damaging to her credibility in the eyes of the court. Her attorneys knew that pushing a false or unverified narrative too aggressively could backfire legally. So the moment arrived when Blake had to concede, in writing, that she had no documentation, no digital evidence, no correspondence, and no communication logs linking Flossom Talk to Baldoni. And that admission effectively dismantled one of her strongest talking points. It wasn't just a minor detail. It was a cornerstone of the story she'd been selling. This admission caused ripple effects across the public discourse. Commentators began questioning how many other claims she had made without evidence. Legal analysts started pointing out that false or unsupported conspiracy allegations often weaken a plaintiff's credibility. And fans who had previously supported her without question started quietly backing away because it became obvious that some of her accusations were emotionally driven rather than factually grounded. And perhaps the most telling part of all is how quickly the conversation shifted once the truth behind her claims was exposed. People realized that a massive portion of her narrative relied on painting herself as a victim of a coordinated attack. But if one of the alleged attackers, Flossom Talk, was never part of any conspiracy, then the entire structure of her victimhood narrative was flawed. In court, credibility is everything. And once it cracked, everything else started collapsing around it. This wasn't just a legal loss, it was a narrative loss. It showed the public that Blake had been operating off assumptions rather than facts, feelings rather than proof, and emotional reactions rather than evidence. And that is why many believe this moment, the moment she admitted that she had no evidence, marked the true beginning of justice finally catching up with the case. When the admission finally became public, that Blake had no evidence tying Flossom Talk to Justin Baldoni, the entire conversation surrounding the case shifted dramatically, not only in the courtroom but also across social media, legal commentary platforms, and entertainment news cycles. Many people who had been quietly skeptical from the beginning now felt validated, because this confirmation aligned with a pattern they had been noticing for months. Blake's accusations simply didn't match the available facts, and the moment one major claim collapsed, others began falling like dominoes. Her credibility, which she relied on heavily as a public figure with a carefully manicured image, began eroding at a pace she couldn't control. In fact, this admission marked the first time the public began questioning whether Blake truly understood the difference between personal suspicion and actionable evidence. At times, it felt as though she blurred that line intentionally, hoping the court and the public would view her intuition as truth. But legal systems don't operate on celebrity intuition, and people began realizing that much of what she had been saying wasn't rooted in verifiable fact but rather in emotional interpretation. Once that became obvious, commentators, lawyers, and viewers started analyzing her previous claims with far more scrutiny. This put her legal team in a complicated position. Once you concede a lack of evidence in one area, judges start demanding clarity in all areas. And that's exactly what happened. Every time Blake or her lawyers presented a new allegation or referenced another supposed coordinated attack, the judge pressed them for documentation. But documentation never came. Her team tried to frame these issues under the umbrella of her emotional distress, trying to portray her assumptions as reasonable given the circumstances. But courts don't give weight to feelings when accusations target specific individuals or channels. If you're going to accuse a commentary creator of working behind the scenes with a high-profile film director to destroy your reputation, you need something more than "the timing of the videos made me suspicious." That excuse collapsed instantly. Meanwhile, Flawsome Talk continued to operate as normal, which only emphasized how absurd Blake's conspiracy narrative had been. If Baldoni were secretly pulling strings, sending talking points, or coordinating online attacks, the commentary channel's content and tone would have shown signs of that. But it didn't. Every video was methodical, slow-paced, legal-focused, and grounded in public filings. Not once did he make claims outside what could be proved through court documents or direct statements from attorneys. And the more the public compared his content with Blake's accusations, the more obvious it became that she had either misunderstood his videos or deliberately twisted their intention to support her desired narrative. But here's where things took a deeper turn. Blake's admission didn't just weaken her argument. It strengthened Baldoni's position. When someone accuses you of manipulating creators and orchestrating online harassment, and they can't prove it, it makes them look like the one engaging in defamation. Baldoni's lawyers recognized this shift immediately. They began using her concession to highlight a broader pattern of unsupported claims, arguing that she had weaponized her fame to demonize anyone who contradicted her version of events. And the judge seemed increasingly aware that some of Blake's statements were framed for public sympathy rather than legal clarity. Public reaction also began shifting. Even fans who were fiercely loyal began changing tone. You could see it in the comments. The blind defense became softer, replaced by confusion, then caution, and in some cases, disappointment. Many had defended her aggressively online because they trusted her integrity. But once they saw she lacked evidence for a major allegation, they began questioning whether she had misled them intentionally. This caused a ripple effect across social media platforms, especially on TikTok, where thousands of edits, breakdowns, and discussions were now calling out the discrepancy between her words and the official filings. This narrative shift was compounded by the fact that commentary creators who had once been neutral or even sympathetic toward Blake began acknowledging the inconsistencies as well. They weren't attacking her. They were simply pointing out the documented truth. And that honesty from diverse creators made the situation even more difficult for Blake to navigate, because it became impossible to portray all of them as part of a conspiracy. At some point, there were too many voices analyzing the case for her to claim everyone was coordinated against her. Another huge turning point arrived when people began comparing the timestamps of Flawsome Talk's videos with the court filings. It turned out that he often released videos after new filings appeared, sometimes same day, sometimes next day. This is normal for commentary creators. But Blake tried to use that timing as proof of insider coordination. That argument didn't hold up because the filings were public. Anyone with an online subscription to a legal document database could access the same information and upload a breakdown. And many creators did exactly that. Flawsome Talk simply did it more consistently and more thoroughly, which made his analysis stand out. The judge recognized this too. When her lawyers tried to use video timing to suggest inside communication, the judge dismissed the point entirely, stating that correlation is not causation, and that public documents create predictable waves of commentary. At that moment, Blake's entire theory of collusion evaporated. Without the timing argument and without real documentation, there was nothing to support her claim of a coordinated smear campaign. As the case progressed, something else became clear. Blake was increasingly isolating herself by refusing to acknowledge discrepancies in her narrative. Instead of adjusting her position or demonstrating accountability, she doubled down, insisting that she felt targeted. But in legal terms, feeling targeted is not the same as being targeted. And this distinction became a recurring theme throughout the proceedings. Her emotional framing was powerful in interviews, social media posts, and PR statements, but inside the courtroom those emotions held no legal weight. This created a sense of imbalance. Baldoni's team focused on evidence, documentation, timestamps, and verified statements. Blake's team leaned heavily on emotional context, framing her as overwhelmed, misunderstood, and attacked. But that strategy began backfiring because judges expect professional discipline, not emotional persuasion. Every time her team tried to use emotion to explain away a lack of evidence, it highlighted the gap even more. By the time depositions were underway, the tone had fully shifted. Witnesses and experts began noting that Blake's interpretation of events lacked substantiation. Her deposition clips, some of which later became viral, revealed that she often relied on personal belief rather than verification. When asked directly about her evidence tying Flossom talk to Baldoni, her answers became vague, circular, and non-committal. She referenced patterns, tones, and assumptions, none of which hold legal weight. These clips fueled another wave of social media discussion, but this time the majority of viewers sided with the evidence, not her perception. Many commented that they were surprised at how unprepared she seemed, considering how aggressive she had been in her allegations. Others pointed out that her body language and vague responses suggested she knew she lacked evidence but didn't want to admit it aloud. This online analysis only further weakened her credibility, because the public was now seeing the discrepancy with their own eyes, rather than through filtered PR narratives. Behind the scenes, pressure began building within her own legal team. Lawyers hate walking into court with weak evidence, especially when the opposing team is organized and fact-heavy. They also dislike when clients make emotional claims online that contradict courtroom realities. Blake's PR team may have encouraged her dramatic public framing, but lawyers understand that anything said publicly can be used against you later. And that's exactly what happened. Her public accusations were compared with her courtroom admissions, exposing her inconsistency. The moment her lawyers realized she couldn't prove collusion, they began subtly reframing her claims. Instead of arguing that Baldoni orchestrated commentary, they shifted to suggesting she felt harassed by the volume of content. But that shift actually hurt her case further, because it made her appear unreasonable. Feeling harassed by commentary is not the same as being harassed. And commentary, when based on fact, is legally protected. The court acknowledged this repeatedly. What made the situation worse was that her accusation against Flossom Talk was avoidable. If she had simply ignored his videos or accepted them as commentary, she wouldn't have created this massive credibility blow. But by elevating the creator into the courtroom spotlight, she ended up giving him more credibility than ever. The public saw him as someone who was unfairly accused and vindicated by documented truth. His subscriber count increased, his videos gained traction, and his reputation as a fact-based commentator solidified. Ironically, Blake's attempt to discredit him made him stronger. Meanwhile, Baldoni's case gained stability. He wasn't perfect, no one in Hollywood or any industry is, but his legal posture became noticeably stronger because Blake kept weakening hers. Every unsupported accusation she made became an asset for him. Courts value consistency, and he had consistency. He had documentation. He had timelines. He didn't rely on emotional narratives. He relied on facts. The final blow in this chapter came when the court officially acknowledged that Blake provided no evidence tying the creator to Baldoni. That acknowledgement entered into the legal record, became a permanent part of the case history. Cannot be spun. Cannot be erased. Cannot be reframed by PR. And because it's part of the official case record, it will follow her for the remainder of the legal battle. Legal analysts began highlighting the long-term consequences of that admission. They pointed out that when a plaintiff presents a major claim without evidence, it can undermine the rest of their arguments, even those that might have merit. Judges begin viewing the plaintiff as unreliable or prone to exaggeration. And in legal battles involving reputation, credibility is everything. Blake's credibility had been compromised, and everyone, from lawyers to journalists to viewers, knew it. As more hearings took place, the ripple effects continued. Every time Blake's team tried to introduce a new allegation, the judge asked a simple question, "Do you have evidence?" And every time the answer was vague or incomplete, the judge seemed to become more skeptical. Eventually, it became clear that her lack of evidence wasn't a one-time issue. It was a pattern. And once a pattern of unsupported accusations is established, the court becomes less and less willing to entertain emotional framing. This is where the concept of justice begins truly emerges. Justice isn't about who cries louder or who has more fans. It's about who brings documented truth. And in this situation, documented truth consistently favored Baldoni and the commentary creator. Blake's narrative, which once seemed strong in the public sphere, had collapsed under factual weight. Her emotional arguments couldn't compensate for her lack of proof, and the court was no longer willing to accept her interpretations as truth. The public, the court, and even some of her supporters began realizing that Blake wasn't the unfairly targeted victim she claimed to be. She was someone who made serious allegations without evidence, someone whose emotions clouded her judgment, and someone who tried to weaponize public perception but failed to substantiate her claims when it truly mattered.